Greetings of the I'm privileged to welcome you all into the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SDR Knowledge Foundation in association with J.H. Raisen University, powered by Raisen Group of Institutions. I am Amit Jangde, delighted to be anchor for today's session. Temple Foods of India, Tradition and Diversity by C.A. Sujata Shukla Rajan in conversation with Dr. Shakti Sharma. C.A. Sujata Shukla Rajan is a chartered accountant by profession, culinary chronicle by passion. She is the author of Bhog Nevedya, Food Offerings to the God. Sujata blogs at paperonpizza.com. Recipe beyond borders, sometimes exotic, often traditional, always delicious. Showcasing traditional regional Indian recipes, including almost forgotten ingredients from her native Tamil cuisine, as well as her favorite recipes from around the world. She has recently commenced a series of podcasts on Indian food history with Aniruddha Kanisetti on all things policy. She enjoys cooking, reading, researching on food, book club meets, travel, music, and Formula One races, as well as being grandmother to three amazing granddaughters who appreciate food and books as much as she does. It's an honor to have you with us, C.A. Sujata Shukla Rajan ma'am. And this gets even more delightful as we have Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am, who will be in conversation with her as the moderator. Now, about Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am. She has a doctorate in food and nutrition, has qualified UGC NET. She received her master's degree with gold medal in food and nutrition from Rani Durgavati University, Jabalpur. She subsequently completed her internship from AIMS New Delhi and Choitaram Hospital, Indore. She is certified diabetic educator and is successfully running a diet clinic, Nutrition and You, for more than 5 years. She is an impressive public speaker on health and wellness and regularly conducts awareness sessions for corporate, various government organizations, and NGOs. She regularly contributes in print and digital media related to diet, health, and wellness. Her passion towards prof- uh, profoundly contributed to the book for upcoming home scientists, nutritionists, and food scientists. I once again welcome you, Sujata ma'am, and I welcome you, Shakti ma'am. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Rupa Publication as their association is invaluable to OCLF. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I humbly invite Dr. Shakti Sharma ma'am to lead us ahead. Ma'am, please.
Thank you so much, Amit. And a very good afternoon to Sujata ma'am, and welcome to today's session, ma'am. Ma'am, at the start, I want to know as interesting your CV is, from being a chartered accountant to a blogger to like a health writer. Equally interesting is the title of your book, ma'am, Bhog Nevedya. So first, I would like to know something about your book, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shakti. It's a privilege to be here today at the Orange City Literature Festival. Give me a second to share my screen. So my book, Bhog Nevedya, is a book on food. And it's not just any food, Dr. Shakti. It is sacred foods as offered to deities in temples across India. The book endeavors to give the reader an understanding of temple cuisine and the surrounding food rituals, explaining the daily offerings at different sevas during the day. At some of India's most popular and ancient temples, there are therefore detailed descriptions of food offerings in the book. However, this is not a recipe book or a cookbook by any means. In order that the reader gets an idea and a mental picture of the food, there are often details of processes and ingredients along with names and descriptions, that's all. And since the offering of food is always integrated with the setting, the book includes mythology, history, description of deities and temples, and of course, food stories of these many venerable temples. Readers may approach the book from the viewpoint of faith and devotion and gain insights into an aspect of religious rituals, which is not often explained in such detail. That is the traditional food offerings at these temples, which have been practiced for many centuries, and the accompanying rituals, food stories, and mythology. On the other hand, readers who are interested in a discussion on food rather than religion may simply focus on the food, enjoy the stories, and gain a better understanding of different regional cuisines, which have impacted the menu for the deity at temples. You don't have to be religious or spiritually inclined to relish this book, Bhog Naivedya. Some friends have even started using the book as a travel guide when they visit temples that I've written about. I find it, very endearing. Another aspect I would like to explain. Most of us are familiar with prasad, which is what is distributed to devotees when we visit the temple. Naivedya, as it is termed in southern India, or bhog, which is a term used in most of North India, on the other hand, are the offerings made to the deity. So prasad is what we devotees get, but the offerings made are bhog or Naivedya. So while the prasad may comprise one or two items such as laddu or halwa or a rice-based item like puliodre or pongal, the Naivedya may be very elaborate. And during a day, we may cover 20 to 30 items even. In the North and East Indian temples to Sri Krishna, Chappan Bhog of 56 different items is offered at many temples. My book therefore describes not just prasad like Tirupati Laddu, which it does describe, but the many different items offered in the course of a day to the gods.
Beautiful description of your book, ma'am. And while reading your book, I really was able to see various places because you've written so beautifully describing the architecture of temples and how the prayers are performed at the temples. Even ma'am, before I read your book and seeing the title, I really felt actually when I go to a temple or some pilgrim, I always feel the strength. And I think the Bhog Prasad is something which gives us all the more strength. Why? Because even if I get the prasad and I'm not at that temple, I still feel I got the blessing from the God. So I just want to be really curious to know what is your opinion about the importance of Bhog Prasad and its importance in gaining the inner strength and positivity.
It is interesting that you should ask this question, Dr. Shakti. I must tell you that at one stage, after my manuscript of Bhog Naivedya was written and was actually getting ready for publication, I started asking myself, one gets doubts. So I was asking myself, what is important about Bhog or Naivedya? Why is it significant enough to have spent a whole year of my life traveling, researching, writing a book about it? Why would readers want to know about different sacred food offerings? What does prasad make us think and feel about? What does it actually mean to us? I think, Shakti, the answer lies in a combination of factors. Food is important to all of us, and some of us have the privilege of being able to think about food as more than a means of sustenance. The pandemic, saw us all scrambling on the internet for recipes and processed videos. Instagram is now full of traditional food, forgotten local ingredients, and recipes that our grandmothers used. Temple foods too are very traditional and, of course, linked to the feeling of devotion and sacredness. This calls for something deep within us. To a South Indian, if you talk about puliogare, properly known as tamarind rice, or puliogare, the image that pops up in the mind's eye, that of Tirupati or Srirangam or Melkote or Chennai's Parthsadi temple's puliogare prasadam. If you mention Peda, the mind goes to Mathura's many temples, Lord Buddha. Hence, the very word Naivedyam offered to the deity invokes in us memories of trips to these temples and darshan of the deities with lingering nostalgia of the prasad we partook of over there. Prasad brings us a thought of food as well as of sacred places, two aspects very close to most of our hearts, and hence the concept of Bhog or Naivedya becomes sacred and important. Coming to your question on Bhog Prasad in relation to gaining inner strength and blessings from God, well, I think spirituality is very subjective. It is a manifestation of each of our inner feelings, beliefs, tastes, and opinions. For a believer in any faith, I think we look for signs to enforce our belief, to find grace and the deity's blessings. And the receiving of Bhog Prasad, which is sanctified offerings, is a visible, tangible sign of this blessing and offers strength and positivity to the believer. In fact, some readers of my book have told me that even reading about the Bhog has felt like a blessing, while others have just enjoyed the descriptions of mouth-watering food and the stories. It all depends on one's beliefs and mindsets, I think.
Really, really, truly, ma'am. I think it's once somebody asked me, why do you keep a fast? Because fasting actually makes you weak. But I feel by keeping a fast, it gives me the strength. It is about the faith. If you have faith in your God, it gives you strength without even eating a food also. And if we get a small portion of nevedya or prasad, we feel, I think, you got the blessings from God. So that has been
Absolutely.
really beautifully given in your book. Then another question that came to my mind while reading this book was, most of the recipes you have said, the traditional recipes are passed down from generation of cooks to the next generation. Although if we use the modern methods of cooking, maybe it becomes more easier to make the naivedya. So why do you think they're still using the traditional recipes? Is there some importance to that also?
To answer your question, let us briefly look at the history of temple rituals and food offerings. I promise not to be very long on this, but you must get a basic understanding. Temple practices follow the Agama Shastras. These are ancient scriptures broadly divided into Saiva Agamas followed in temples to Lord Shiva, Vaishnava Agamas followed in temples to Lord Vishnu, and Shaka Agamas followed in the worship of Shakti Devi. Jaina and Buddhist religions also follow certain Agama texts. All these are canonical texts laid down. They laid down the procedures for many aspects related to worship, dealing with not only religious aspects, but social, economic, cultural, as well as philosophical ones. If you go through the Agamas, Shakti, you will find detailed instructions for the construction of temples, planning, design, even measurements. There are procedures for selection of the ground for constructing the temple, installation and consecration of idols, the location as well as construction of places in the temple like the kitchen and the sanctum sanctorum. Scholars have suggested that the earliest written form of the Agamas may be placed around mid-century CE, mid-6th century CE or earlier, according to the evidence of inscriptions from the Pallava period at Kanchipuram and Amaravati, to name two. The Agamas probably, of course, exist much before these records in the oral tradition. Within the Agamas, if you take the Shaiva Shastras, for example, the Kamika Agama is a text which prescribes the manner in which rituals are to be undertaken, and it includes rituals for Abhisheka or ritual bathing of the deity, Alamkara or adorning the deity, Naivedya or Havis, which is food offerings, Upakara or offering of other services, sorry, that should be Upachara, or offering of other services, and Bali Tambula or offering beaten leaves and nuts. The Agama Shastra dictate the procedures for preparation and offerings of sacred foods. As they have long been established as canonical texts to be followed, temple personnel follow them very diligently and will not knowingly deviate from them. These scriptures, when they were first recorded, would have followed the processes and materials available in those ancient days, which included firewood, clay hearths, clay pots, metal vessels such as those made from silver, iron, brass, bronze, etc. See, religious rituals are very traditional. And as I said earlier, the priests and cooks would not like to deviate from them at all, as they believe that any deviation will drastically affect the sanctity of the offering. Hence, they continue to follow these practices laid down centuries ago. And from my personal interaction with many of them during the course of my travels, I have seen how serious they are about adhering to every bit of these practices. You will see in my book that modernity has caught up with temple food. While the food offerings to the deity, that is Naivedya or Bhog, is strictly made using only traditional methods or processes, many of the large kitchens where prasad for distribution to devotees are made have invested in sophisticated equipment in the prasad kitchens. Take the Shirdi Sai Baba temple, for instance. The Bhog for Sai Baba is prepared using traditional processes and equipment in a separate kitchen. And this is for a rather small quantity of food. That is the one offered to Baba himself. The Prasadalu, on the other hand, prepares food for 30 to 40,000 devotees each day and double that on festival days and Thursdays. It will be very difficult to manage these volumes of food using firewood hearths and traditional processes. Hence, the Prasadalu is now equipped with more than 70 rooftop solar dishes or receivers for the energy supply to the kitchen, including for the massive rice boilers in use. There are automated equipment for grinding as well as a huge chapati making machine, which turns out perfectly puffed up fulkas. It was amazing to see the way rotis are turned out in that machine. At the Golden Temple at Amritsar too, a chapati making machine has been installed with the capacity to turn out 4,000 chapatis in an hour. However, a service or seva in the form of actual manual labor is an important aspect of the Sikh langar, The rotis are usually made only by the volunteers. On weekends and days of religious significance, when the daily influx of devotees who sit down for langar goes up to around 1 lakh to 1.5 lakhs or so, the chapati machine may be put to use. At the Tirupati Sri Balaji temple, laddus for prasadam, which are the largest item prepared at the food item prepared at the temple, they are made in a separate bundi poto located just outside the temple, which is equipped with LPG fueled ovens. The fried bundis are carried on steel trays by conveyor belts to another kitchen inside the temple, where mechanical equipment mixes the bundi with other ingredients. But the shaping of the laddu is still done manually. Interestingly, at the Puri Jagannath temple, see, this image is that of the Ananta Vasudev temple, where the processes and ingredients and chapan bhog, the menu are all similar to the Puri Jagannath temple. I could not take photographs at the Puri temple, therefore I'm showing you this one. At the Puri Jagannath temple, where Mahaprasad is sold in the Ananda Bazaar for at least 30,000 per day and 50,000 and more on holidays and weekends, going up to 1 lakh or more on festival days, every bit of Mahaprasad is made in the traditional way on clay pots or placed on clay chulis or hearths, fed by firewood. All the work involved in preparation of vegetables and ingredients is 100% manual. It is a culture, a way of life and worship. And I don't think any of this is likely to change in the foreseeable future.
Ma'am, you have very well said that a culture is actually a way of life. We are always seeing that the modern cooking methods or the processes have changed. Even we move globally thinking that the westernized culture is more educated. But with time, we are moving back to the basics, to the roots. Again, the use of clay pots, the traditional recipes, organic vegetables are coming. So my next question to you is that whenever we see the bhog Naivedya, which is given in your book also, you said according to the season, the ingredients were changing. And they were basically local seasonal vegetables. So do you think that it was also a way of teaching the common people what is a healthy or balanced diet is?
Very interesting, Dr. Shakti, but I don't think the temple Naivedya was a means of teaching the population about a healthy, balanced diet. It was probably the other way around. Let me explain why. Okay. I believe that until a few generations ago, this is how we ate. We procured ingredients locally. Lack of an efficient transport system to move men and materials could be the primary reason which made sense to purchase food items within a walking or bullock cart distance. More people grew their own food too in little patches in their own backyard. Everything had to be processed manually or with some mechanical help, as there was no electrical equipment. Naturally, the food at homes was seasonal because vegetables and fruits were available only seasonally, and refrigerated storage systems were not in place at all. I believe that temples and temple cooks simply incorporated the local cuisine into their kitchens, as that was what they knew and that was what was available. If you take any one locality with a number of temples of different deities, you will see that all of them have similar food offerings. Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti temples in northern India offered the same type of food you would find in prosperous homes of that region, as is the case in South Indian temples. That's rasam, sambar, kuttu, avial. What you ate at home was what was offered to the gods at the temple, but of course richer and more elaborate. In short, I think temple foods across India are a microcosm of the food cultures of the country, with region or sub-regional celebrations of its cuisine at the local temple with local, seasonal and indigenous ingredients.
So now you can also tell us about some local cuisines that you visited, which were used or which were not used in the temples while you traveled.
Dr. Shakti, now you're going to make me and the audience feel very hungry as I'm going to start describing these foods. And I'm describing only a minuscule portion of what is actually there in my book. This is the Nathdwara temple where Annakot is being offered. In the 130 or more temples that I visited, one common factor was that each temple made and offered food from the local cuisine, whether it was for daily Naivedyam or for festival celebrations. So it could be puri, sabzi, dal, chawal in the Jyotirlinga Kashi Vishwanath Mandir at Varanasi, for instance. But at the Nathwara temple in Rajasthan, Sri Krishna or Srinathji is offered an elaborate daily chapan bhog of 56 items, all from Rajasthani cuisine. It includes items like kadi, moong ki dal, chawal, mirchi ki sabzi. This is one of the few mirchi items offered in temples across India. I found hardly 3 temples offered mirchi in their food offerings. Sikran bath made of rice and shrikhand, several vegetable preparations, and different types of rotis. At the Sri Venkateshwara temple in Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh, the deities offer daily Naivedyam from Andhra cuisine, which, as you would know, is largely rice-based. The offerings include rice preparations like matra annam or butter rice, pulihora, guda annam, mudga annam, and several other rice-based items, as well as a host of sweet and savory varieties such as laddu, appam, dosai, vadai, payasam, etc. These are just the kind of food you would find in many homes in Andhra for a grand festival lunch. I must add that when I mention any of our regional cuisines, I'm speaking very broadly. For example, Andhra cuisine itself is not just one, but includes several distinct and sub-regional cuisines. But the temple food picks up from most of these regional cuisines, or sometimes is restricted to the immediate location of the temple. It depends from temple to temple. Apart from the food in all temples being sourced locally and being seasonal in nature, almost all temples I studied used only indigenous vegetables and fruits. That is, those which were available locally in the centuries before the Columbian exchange. That is, before Vasco da Gama and other Europeans introduced new items into India from the late 15th or 18th century CE. Hence, that is, see, the Agama Shastras came in before this Columbian exchange of Vasco da Gama and others happened. So these vegetables are not even known when temple foods were formulated. So temple cuisine normally does not include potatoes, cauliflower, capsicum, tomato, carrot, beetroot, peas, or chilies. Onion and garlic are by and large not used in temple offerings. Interestingly, even where meat and fish are offered to the deity, as in Northeast India, Bengal, Odisha, and some South Indian temples too, onion and garlic are not included in the preparation of the meat-based bhog. Festival food at temples is rather broadly similar to festival food at homes in the region, except for some items unique or specially made from ancient traditional recipes of the temples. You take Onam, for example, which is celebrated all over Kerala, across communities, with an elaborate home-cooked feast. You will see in my book that the Ona Sadhya, the plantain leaf lunch served on Onam Day, is similar both at homes and in temples like the Aranmula Parthsadi temple to Lord Krishna, except that the feast at the temple is really elaborate with more than 30 items, much more than may be practically prepared and served at home. But the cuisine is of Kerala. It comprises preparations like erisari, pulisari, thoran, sambar, avial, kalan, pachadi, puli inji, raw banana chips, and other varieties of chips, several local types of pickles, laddus made of gingerly, sesame, and of peanuts, papadam, several varieties of paisam, and so much more.
Ma'am, the food is really mouth-watering and really going hungry. Ma'am, I will really take this time to ask you one question, ma'am, which I always feel. Ma'am, whenever we make a bhog prasad, even at home, I think that food, although while preparing, we don't taste that food, it becomes really tasty. Actually, when you visited these places, I just want to know from your experience, is it actually that a bhog prasad is becomes tasty because of some blessing, or is it actually psychological because the object is with all the love we have for the god?
Again, perhaps there are two aspects to this. That is our enjoyment of puja offerings or festival food at home. Both are similar. One aspect that it comes down to faith. When you feel that you're prepared, what you're prepared with love and care and offered to the gods is blessed by the gods. The food tastes flavorful and delicious. It somehow becomes different. But there is another aspect too. Look at the recipes of temple foods or that offered for festivals at home. Laddu, appam, modak, puliyodare, kheer, vadai, barfi, kachori, firni, sevia, mutton biryani, khichori, baigan bhaja. One common factor in all of these are that they are made from traditional recipes. We don't use modern food. We don't make pasta for the gods, right? They use traditional ingredients to a large extent, except of course when we try out newer ingredients or create fusion recipes, which again we rarely do. Whether made with ghee or an oil from local cuisine like sesame oil or mustard oil, whether a complex item which takes some hours to make or a simple one, the foods are inherently tasty, and they also take us on an actual nostalgic trip of family, celebration, good times. These, I think, also enhance the flavors. When you feel good,
I really think so, ma'am, because we always use the traditional recipe, even if it is time consuming.
sorry, I'd not finished. The flight was going overhead. When you feel good, you feel high on positiveness and energy. So perhaps it's a combination of faith as well as psychology and well-being. Yes, Dr. Shakti.
Yes, ma'am. I feel since we follow the traditional method of cooking, that makes it all the more interesting fact. We do not
Absolutely.
deviate the recipe. Maybe it's time consuming, still we have so much love within. We want to shower all the love on the God because He always takes care of us. I feel the same. Maybe even a mother is preparing a food for the child. Now, while you were saying it's just the love that we have, we can make the same food tasty. One very interesting part of your book is we all worship Mother Nature. We worship the sun, the moon, the planets. And in our culture, we also worship the serpents and the birds. And in your book also it talks about the serpent deities. I request you to please share something about the temples which are devoted to these.
As you know, Hindu mythology is full of tales of serpents and serpent deities, from the powerful Ananta or Adisesha, on whom Lord Vishnu lies on Yoga Nidra on the ocean of milk, and whose several foots hold all the planets together, to the serpent moon round Lord Shiva's neck, to Manasa Devi, who is worshipped in many different forms, many others too. There are descriptions in my book of the much revered Kuke Subramanya temple in Karnataka with the related mythology of how Lord Subramanya or Muruga Kartik came to be worshipped as a protector of serpents. In most regions of India, there are no temples dedicated to serpent deities. There are some, but their idols may be sculpted, may be seen sculpted into niches or carved on rocks in temples to other gods, particularly Lord Shiva's temples. When you travel to villages across India, you see the small stone statues or sculptures of snake deities at the foot of a prominent peepal tree. Anthills, which are the traditional homes of the Naga serpent deities, are another place of ophiolatory or serpent worship. Sacred groves near villages or in forests are often places of serpent worship too. As explained in my book, the northeastern regions of India, as well as Bengal and Odisha, see extensive worship of Manasa Devi, the serpent goddess. Her stories are very, very interesting. I have not brought many into the book. I'll just briefly mention them. There are many mythological tales of her birth and her worship. She is believed to have been an ancient deity who was absorbed into Hindu worship through references in the later Puranas. She is also considered to be Padma, a counterpart of the Jain snake goddess. While there are temples for her worship, she is popularly seen as a household deity. In Bengal, you will see many small shrines in the courtyard of a house, or as a common shrine in the village as a community deity. My book describes some very interesting Manasa Puja rituals in the worship in villages and among tribals in Assam, where the worship transcends religion and caste, and the entire village comes together for the festival. There may be animal sacrifices as well as music with songs and traditional instruments, these being specific to this particular worship. Fish, fruit, and betel nuts are also offered. Naga Panchami is a day for worship of serpent deities across India. Many devotees fast on that day and offer milk at anthills and snake pits. Offering of eggs and milk at anthills and snake habitats is also a common feature of snake worship.
We have various questions coming in the chat box. I'll just take one last question with ma'am and then we'll move to the question answer session. Ma'am, in your book, my personal favorite is the goddess in her many forms, in which Devi Durga has been symbolized as women being devotion, love, calmness. But when it comes, she can also be fearful, powerful, fight for her dignity. So I request you to please share something about your experience of the temples of Goddess Durga.
The temples of the goddesses were favorites during my travels too. The original manuscript of my book, Dr. Shakti, included many more temples than those finally incorporated in the published book, as my manuscript was too long and unwieldy. And in the process, several of the interesting temples to goddess Shakti or Durga had to be dropped off. Many of the ancient temples, both Shakti Peethams and others, seemed to me, when I went there, to exude a powerful force among them. At the Kanyakumari Bhagavati Amman temple at the tip of India, the face of the idol is so beautiful, it is mesmerizing and difficult to tear one's eyes away. It is with reluctance that I moved away from the Sanctum Sanctorum and the goddess with the blazing diamond nose stud, whose legend I have described in the book. The goddess of the Madurai Meenakshi temple in Tamil Nadu has been sung about in ancient Tamil Sangam period epics, such as the Shilapatikaram, and again exudes power and presence. The temples of the East are truly awe-inspiring. Whether it is a Kamakhya Devi temple in Guwahati, where the fiery goddess is appeased with a sacrificed goat every day, or the Kali temple at Kalighat, Kolkata, where the idol's vivid red tongue, or the almost forgotten 9th century CE temple, which I visited at Hirapur near Bhubaneswar. This temple, which you can see on the screen, the Chausat Yogini temple, is just not to be missed if you make a trip to Bhubaneswar. As it is not in my book, I would like to take a minute to describe it to you. The Chausat Yogini temple has 64 Yogini sculptures around the Sanctum Sanctorum. You can see these here with the decorations too. It has an open, that is roofless circular architecture design unique to Yogini temples such as this one and the one surviving near Gwalior in Madhya Pradesh. Goddess Durga is believed to have manifested in 64 forms to fight a demon. After their victory, the 64 flying yoginis settled down in a circle around the goddess. Hence, the temple structure, which incorporates each of the yogini idols in a niche in a circle which forms the wall of the Sanctum Sanctorum. Two images stay in my mind when I think of the worship of Goddess Durga. One is of Durga Puja at Kolkata in October 2019. I visited many of the puja pandals on the streets of the city, as well as I was a guest at a large Boneri Bari puja or traditional puja at a Bengali home. It is difficult to express the feeling of puja at Kolkata, although I have tried to do so in my book. The very streets are vibrant with sound and color and festivity and food, of course. This is the time for Bengali food, and I ate so much you will not believe. The pandals each have their own menus for the bhog offered to Ma Durga on each day of the puja, and that distributed to the devotees on Ashtami and Navami days. Khichuri is, of course, a given, as are various bhajas, aloo, bangan, etc. For the Saptami and Navami bhog, many pandals offer the deity Luchi with 5 types of bhaja, as well as pulao, halwa, and payesh. Sweets include chandrapuli, sandesh, Pantua, all of which brought back to me memories of my childhood growing up in Kharagpur in West Bengal. In my book, I've described all these foods and more, and it was a mouth-watering experience to research the Durga Puja festival in Kolkata. One experience I must tell you about, and it's the concluding part of my book. It is the last of my travels on 9th March 2020, as I had to abandon the rest of my itinerary and get back home to Bangalore with the pandemic beginning its sweep across India. I was at Thiruvananthapuram for the Atukal Pongala festival, a very old festival celebrated one day in the year. Dr. Shakti, this is such an awesome festival. I was so glad I participated in it at least once in my lifetime. For one day in the year, lakhs of women take over the streets of this capital of Kerala to worship goddess Bhagavati Amman, that is goddess Parvati. They set up simple brick huts along the roads of the city, and they cook pongal on the streets for offering to the goddess. This pongal is similar to a sweet khichdi with rice and moong dal, along with jaggery and sometimes coconut. It is called Sakara Pongal in Tamil Nadu, Pongal in Kerala. Women from different communities and faiths assemble without thought of caste or creed or economic status. All are equal here. It is a celebration of womanhood and sisterhood. The deity of the Bhagavati Amman temple has a very interesting legend surrounding her. My book will tell you the story of Kannagi, as narrated in the Tamil epic Silappatikaram. Kannagi's husband Kovalan was wrongfully executed by the Pandya king, and the righteous fury which emanated from Kannagi's eyes set fire to the town of Madurai. The goddess Meenakshi of Madurai had to appear in person to pacify Kannagi and save the town. It is Kannagi who is deified in the Bhagavati temple, and the women who gathered here in worship for Atufal Pongala worship this woman who stood up to the powerful Pandya king in anger at the injustice rendered to her. Truly a celebration of the strength of a woman and of the goddess that is present in each woman.
Ma'am, your way of
Thank you.
describing is beautiful. And to the audience, I would really say when I was reading the chapter on, because ma'am has described all the temples and the way the strength of the goddess is there in a beautiful way. Her words are very impressive and it goes deep within your soul. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this. And now we come to the audience and they have few questions. So I'll quickly take 3-4 questions, ma'am, if you permit me.
Of course, my pleasure.
Yeah. So, ma'am, one question is from Shubham Khandarkar, and he is asking, what motivated you to write this book? That's a very relevant question, ma'am. We all go
Absolutely.
to temples.
Subham, ever since high school, I wanted to write. Not this book, not this particular book, but to become a journalist or a writer. Life, however, took me on other paths and I became a chartered accountant, busy in my work and practice and family for 3 decades. My writing was restricted to writing lengthy audit reports, which I then had to sit and cut down. But the urge to write was there. And I started my food blog, pepperonpizza.com, in 2015 or so. When my editor from Rupa Publications mooted the idea of a book on sacred foods, it immediately caught my attention as it was about food. And I love food. I enjoy researching and I like sacred sites, which I'm very familiar with. During childhood, my father took us to temple towns across India, literally dragged us to sometimes, from Varanasi and Allahabad to Puri to Kanyakumari in the southernmost tip of India. Religious occasions were celebrated at home very traditionally, including with my mother making all the prescribed Nevedyam for each particular Tamil festival. During my many travels for my work, I would visit the local sacred sites, whether famous churches or dargahs or temples. I was therefore very happy to take up the offer and plunge into the writing of the book, Bhog Nevedya. I hope that
We are
answers
lucky
your
you,
question.
you took this offer, ma'am, because you've done great justice to the book. It's a great title.
Thank you so
Another
much.
question is from Devika Parihar. So, Devika, I put up your question. She says it's a very different topic, ma'am, and would love to know how much time it took to do the research and how did you plan which religious places to visit? Maybe she is looking for something similar to write.
Well, Devika, it took exactly 1 year. I focused entirely on the book during that time, so I was able to do it in 1 year. I traveled a lot. The contract with Rupa Publications was executed at the end of July 2019. And from the first week of August, I began my travel and research. To begin with, I had not realized I would need to travel so much. But when I checked, there was very little material on record. There were descriptions, mostly newspaper and magazine or blog articles on prasadam. There were a few books on specific temples. But what we, that is the editor and I, were looking for was much more. And that information was not available. So I made my travel plans. Initially, I thought I would write about extraordinary or significant items of Nevedyam, such as the first one in my book, the 72 kg Korakattai or Modak offered to Lord Ganesha at the Madurai Meenakshi temple in Tamil Nadu just once a year on Vinayaka Chaturthi. As I visited more and more temples around Madurai and then Chennai, going to the popular ones or ones with food stories, I realized that I was on the wrong track. It was not enough to write about special offerings. At every temple in India, there are offerings made to the gods through the day, at each of the sevas or puja times. This had not been captured or written about in a very comprehensive way. I soon discovered that temples followed the regional or local cuisine, and only some had a special item of Nevedyam or Bhog. Studying the daily offerings of temples across India would mean I could write about the cuisine of the many regions of the country, and hence I changed tracks. I made a list of popular and ancient temples and those with famous food stories. When I visited them, I hunted out lesser known temples in the vicinity and learned their food stories and legends. In this way, I traveled across India, visiting these sites, discussing directly with priests and temple cooks. with the permission of temple authorities, and I collected the information which is now in my book. In early March 2020, the pandemic forced me to stop traveling, and the remaining research was through phone calls to temple priests and from books and reliable information online. My first draft manuscript was ready exactly 1 year, that is on 31st July 2020. Thank you.
So, ma'am, I'll take the last question, and that's from Professor Anandita Kundu. She has asked, just on a lighter side, she says, I want to know among the various temples you visited, the Bhog Prasad of which place is your favorite one?
This is such a difficult question because I have so many favorites. I'll try to really restrict it. During I would get a prasadam item from the prasadam counter, or some kind priest would give me a leaf bowl full of some delicious goodness. But on the whole, I was rushing from one place to another to be able to reach the priest during the temple hours. And very often I had to grab whatever food I could get in some place in these unknown towns that I visited. But the descriptions from priests were very evocative. And having a fair knowledge about food of different regional cuisines, I could visualize the taste and appearance of some of the bhog items that I came across. A personal favorite which I actually tasted was the Mahaprasad at Sri Ananta Vasudev temple in Bhubaneswar. That chappan bhog is similar to the one offered at the Puri Jagannath temple. I had Odia food there served on a banana leaf. Ghia anna, that is ghee rice, meetha dali, that is sweet dal, besara, vegetables in mustard base, chole, pachadi, a dish made of cucumber, apple, coconut in curd, salt and green chilies. This is a very simple but delicious prasad. I would love to taste some foods like in the Puri Jagannath temple, there is one item called saliana. There is a rice called sunakila, a variety of rice. This is cooked as usual, and then ghee, salt, and you Nagpurites will be happy to hear, fresh orange juice is added to that rice. At the Nathdwara temple,
and I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
Now, on a lighter note, there's a question from Professor Anandita Kundu, and she has asked, I just want to know among the various temples you visited, the Bhog Prasad of which place you like the most?
This is such a difficult question, Professor, because I have so many favorites. But let me tell you first one thing. During my travels, I did not get to actually taste the Naivedyam in most temples. Sometimes I would get some prasadam item from the prasadam counter, or some kind priest would give me a leaf bowl full of some delicious goodness. But on the whole, I was rushing from one place to another to be able to access the priest during temple hours. And very often I had to grab whatever food I could get in some unknown place in the unknown towns that I visited. I didn't get much good food during my travels. But the descriptions from the priests were very evocative. And I could visualize the taste and appearance of these many bhog items that I came across. A personal favorite, which I really actually tasted, was a Mahaprasad at Sri Ananta Vasudev temple in Bhubaneswar. I showed a visual of the temple kitchen earlier. Their chappan bhog is similar to the one offered at the Puri Jagannath temple. I had a typical set of Oriya food items there. Served on a banana leaf, the meal included ghee anna, ghee rice, meetha dali, sweet dal, besara, vegetables and mustard base. I make that besara at home now quite often. Chole, pachadi, a dish made of cucumber, apple, coconut in curd, salt and green chilies. That was a simple but very delicious prasad. Some I would really love to actually taste would be like in the chappan bhog at the Puri Jagannath temple. There is saliana, which is made from sunakila, a variety of rice, which is cooked as usual. And then ghee, salt, and you Nagpurites will be happy to hear, fresh orange juice is added to this rice. I would love to taste it. I love oranges. And that too, Nagpur ka santra ka kya bolna hai. At the Nathdwara temple in Rajasthan, the boy Krishna or Srinathji is fed with many delicious foods. To mention just a few, at mid-morning, he gets makhan mishri, puri, batashe, dahi. In winter, at the first bhog of the day, Mangala Seva, he is offered doodh or badam ka halwa, milk boiled till very thick, cooked with almonds. In summer, there are several dishes made from fresh mango juice, such as amrasa and manohar ka laddu, again made with mango juice. The Raj Bhog in the afternoon is a veritable feast. You will have to go to my book for this, as the list is too long and to describe here. The most fascinating one of all would be the food offered at the Aranmula Parthasadi temple in Kerala, again, which I mentioned earlier. The idol of this temple is said to have been installed by Arjuna from the Mahabharata. On Janmashtami, known as Ashtami Rohini Valasadhya, about 51 days, sets of boat crew who ply their craft on the river Pampa are offered food. one set of boatmen for each day of the 2-month festival. The boatmen and other devotees are offered 64 items or more, and they can't waste even one morsel. The food is all from Kerala cuisine. And again, you should read my book for the mouth-watering descriptions, as well as for the very interesting rituals, including songs, which accompany this feast. Thank you for these very lovely questions, which I had the pleasure to answer.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving your time and being for today's session. And I think we can end the session on this note that we have changed the perception of going to a temple now. I would also like to learn what different things are done at temples. Thank you so much, ma'am, and over to you, Amit.
If I may, actually, this is a kind of off-topic question, but I also have a question of mine.
Yes,
Ma'am, you
please.
said in your bio that you're a Formula One fan. I am a avid fan as well. So, which is your
I'm
favorite
sorry.
Grand
I'm sorry. You'll have to just repeat it. I'm not able to catch up.
You said that you follow Formula One. I follow it as well. It's very entertaining. So,
Last weekend
which is
was
your favorite Grand Prix?
last 3 weekends. I've been having sleepless nights, because the races
too,
were
ma'am.
in the US and Mexico. Yes,
Yeah, yeah. So the Sao Paulo one was a very dramatic one. The Brazil Grand Prix.
absolutely. The last race was fantastic.
So, which is your favorite Grand Prix?
Which is my favorite?
Grand Prix. Favorite weekend.
Monaco.
Yeah.
It has to
I
be
guess
Monaco.
that's
Something or the
everyone.
other keeps happening. And I'm a big fan of Michael Schumacher's. So when I think of Monaco, I remember Michael Schumacher and how he used to sweep that circuit. What
Yeah,
is your
true, ma'am.
favorite?
Absolutely.
Amit, what is your favorite?
I would have Silverstone, ma'am. Silverstone.
Oh, Silverstone is another.
I follow Lewis Hamilton more because he's from my era, right? I started following him. Yeah.
The last race was fantastic. The way he, oh my God, he was unbeatable. Amazing.
Yeah. Came back from 10th, finished first. That was really something. Yeah. So, all right.
So I think I can just make a correction to Amit. He said the person who we like is from his era. I think man is in this era only now.
Yeah,
Man
of
is
course
quite
she is.
young at heart.
I have many
Yeah,
young friends and they keep me young. Yeah.
Absolutely great.
I started following late. That's what I meant. Yeah. So, at the outset, I would like to thank CA Sujata Shukla Rajan, ma'am, and Dr. Shakti Sharma, ma'am, for joining us today. We wish to get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we all are today. And for my dear massive audience, I'm sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking home an enriched version of yourself. Just as I will. Thank you for joining with us today. Until I see you again, this is Amay Jangal signing off.
Welcome to Rai Soni Group, a vision beyond.